Zoltan's new warning about Russian commodities potentially being equivalent to subprime mortgages back in 2008. Everything is about collateral.
Absolutely. So there was I guess you call it a piece I stumbled across earlier today, reportedly from Zoltan Pozar. There were three key points that kind of raised some questions. And so the first key point from all of this was Zoltan makes the argument that due to the sanctions that are imposed right now, Russian commodities trade at a discount compared to non-Russian commodities. Just to be clear, a bushel of wheat is still the same bushel of wheat, soybeans, whatever. But if you have some sanction or some geopolitical filter that's put in place, even though Russian wheat is equivalent and is fungible with, let's say, I don't know, French wheat, if there's an export restriction or an import restriction from the Russian wheat, then you've got this concern in terms of can the commodities actually be delivered when the time comes.
Counterparty
Hence,
risk.
exactly. And it's this. It would suggest that you have an impairment of the collateral. Long story short, Russian commodities, due to the sanctions that that is the West, the buyers have put in, make it trade at a discount. So the second point that he mentions is that these sanctions are driven by the consumer, that is, essentially the West in this story, as people who would buy the commodities, versus the producers. And he makes the comment that if you go back to 73 with the OPEC sanctions, you had a similar dynamic, but it was the producers, OPEC. So basically the people who were selling oil that were putting in the embargo and the restrictions versus the people who were buying it. So there was that. And then he starts to connect the dots, which I thought was really interesting to read in terms of what this means for the market in general. So if someone is short commodities, let's say as a COMEX contracts, in other words, they have sold short, I'll just pick on wheat, for example, and they're short wheat over here, but they also over here say, okay, well, listen, I've got, a shipload of, I don't know how they sell wheat, but I've got 20 tons of wheat coming in from Russia, or at least it should come in every month. The ship comes in, I sell it, and I'm able to take my long position in the real goods and close out my short position from COMEX. Well, that only works if, international trade's working, if there's no embargoes or whatever. So in this particular situation, if your short position is hedged by a long position. So if your short position is hedged by a long position and the long position becomes impaired due to, some geopolitical factor, due to some trade factor or whatever, or it just becomes short in general. In other words, the boat's still scheduled to sail, but now there's just been this impairment, or the market thinks there's been an impairment on it. Suddenly you've got an issue, and this is going to cause, divergence, where you say, okay, well, listen, COMEX, yes, I know I'm short over here for this wheat, but the reason I'm good for it is because I have this wheat coming in over there. And COMEX would say, listen, everything else being normal, we completely get you. But because there's this tinge of contagion, there's this tinge of doubt in the system, we actually don't know that. Because we don't know that, we need you to put up a little more stake in the game. Yes, we know the ship is still scheduled to go. Yes, we know everything should be on the level, but just in case it doesn't, we've got to hedge ourselves. And so this is, where you have this stuff going on.
This is exactly what was happening in 2008.
Yeah.
Well, let's just compare and contrast. What were subprime mortgages? They were just, if you're going in a repo agreement, you put up collateral. Subprime mortgages were just a liquid form of dollars that they could put up in exchange. So let's say I want to borrow money on a short-term basis. I put up collateral, so I'm able to borrow that money. And these subprime mortgages just happen to be used at mass scale because they were liquid and usually just traded pretty stagnant. But
Yeah.
what happened when these subprime mortgages shit the bed?
Or just a quick side note, it's not so much that the subprime mortgages shit the bed. They did shit the bed, but just as a technical point of order, it doesn't matter if they're actually solvent or not. It doesn't matter if they're actually good or not. All that matters is the counterparty willing to accept.
It's
perceived. Like that's the catch. And like going back to, let's say, the wheat example we just said, let's say the ship's going to sail on time, but if people think the wheat's not going to get here or whatever, right, then you create a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, as you say, Josh, when it came to subprimes and mortgage-backed securities, those actually weren't legit. So just to be clear,
it doesn't actually matter, as Justin says. It is only the perception. This is just the banking system's only restraints are within the banks itself. It is the perception of other banks and the balance sheets that they agree upon. If for Lehman Brothers, let's go back to them, for example. They would not, if everybody agreed that they would have still done business with Lehman Brothers, they would still be here today. The only reason Lehman Brothers went bust was not because they were leveraged massively. All these guys were leveraged massively. It was how everybody did business. It was not because their balance sheet was terrible. All these guys' balance sheets were terrible at that time when these things went back down. The reason why they went bust is because all other banks said, we're not going to do business with Lehman Brothers or Bear Stearns anymore. Therefore, they can't do business with anyone else. Let's say now, with that same example of bushels of wheat, if this person gets all of their wheat from Russia and everybody else knows that, and they say, whoa, they're not going to get their wheat. It doesn't matter if they get their wheat or not, because no one's going to do business with them. Therefore, that wheat seller is screwed, because everyone already agreed they're not going to do business with him. They're looking for somebody else to do business with. He gets the wheat and it doesn't even matter. It's too late.
Yeah, and the wheat sellers in this case short because he's already sold the wheat, and theoretically there's, I guess, there's a time and a place for futures, for people to sell short, etc. But anyways, yeah, it's a doozy. I'll also note that Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns were the only two. Lehman because they didn't have the money at the time, and Bear Stearns just because they pulled out a backstab and stabbed the consortium in the back when they were bailing out LTCM in '98. Those were the only two firms, or the only two families on Wall Street that didn't participate in the LTCM bailout. And those were the only two firms that went under in 2008. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but
yeah,
just things that make you go, Right, anyways, so enough history for time being. So anyways, the point is that like if you have non-Russian commodities, this is what we were just saying, that are going down at the same time, non-Russian commodities that are going up, so wheat that's not being sourced from Russia is appreciating in value. And likewise, you have wheat that's being sourced in Russia that's going down in value, even though it's the same wheat or the same soybeans or whatever, right? But you have this divergence that doesn't make any sense. Or the reason it doesn't make sense is because the market's worried about geopolitics and, the impairment of delivery or whatever. But this is the key thing. And when you have this divergence, this kind of goes into these three questions. The first of which, Josh, you just put up there is there enough collateral or credit for margins if you have a spread on commodities that widen? So relating this, Josh, back to the wheat example, COMEX might say, okay, well, listen, Josh, you've sold, 1,000 tons of wheat short. We think you're good for it, but here's the thing. Number one, wheat's spiking in price. So we're kind of a little concerned right there. Now, we also know that you've entered into futures or forward contract. I can't always get mixed up. Anyway, forward. You've entered into a forward contract where you are legally obligated to take delivery of, your 1,000 units of wheat or whatever, right? So we see that, and we see that you have posted it as collateral. That's typically good. But here's the problem. This wheat that you've posted, it's coming from Russia. And as these spreads converge, even though wheat is wheat, we're not saying that's not the case, but what we're saying is that we doubt your ability, we doubt your counterparty abilities, resilience to be able to deliver the wheat to you. And if you don't have the wheat, you are, in the case of me being COMEX, you are my counterparty. And if you fail, I'm on the hook. Yeah. In other words, now the ship, it hasn't gone and canceled yet or anything like that. But for the time being, Josh, I would just feel more comfortable, as in you're going to have to do this, if you stake just a little bit more collateral, putting up a little bit more cash, just in case something goes wrong. That's I think what you're saying is question
same
number
thing.
One.
Exactly same thing. And this is kind of the compare and contrast in 2008. Subprime mortgages, this is the exact same thing that was happening. It is simply the perception. And if subprime mortgages didn't go down in value, but everyone still agreed that they didn't want to do business with people that were using subprime mortgages, then it wouldn't have mattered, because that's all it takes is people to lose trust in their counterparty.
So the second question, Josh, which you just put up is, okay, what happens if a central counterparty fails? So in our prior example, we were talking about COMEX as a central counterparty. But if you've been following us with the GameStop saga, the DTCC would be the central or the NSCC or the OCC would be central counterparties in that story. So the question is what happens if, let's say, COMEX fails? So let's just go back to our wheat example. Let's say the boat that's coming in to give Josh's wheat fails. And so Josh is like, well, wait a minute. Now I'm short 1,000 units of wheat, and wheat spiked up to $1 bazillion. I can't afford that. I'm going to go bust. And the reason that I even went short in the first place was because I was supposed to take delivery of the underlying. So that was my hedge. But my hedge blew up due to, geopolitical, due to events outside my control. My hedge has blown up. So now I've blown up. So then it rebounds onto COMEX. And COMEX is like, well, shit, we don't have the money either for this or whatever, right?
And same thing with going back to this just counterparty and perceived risk. It doesn't even matter if they blow up. They are already short these contracts, and they're agreeing to go into, me and Justin are agreeing to do business, but he's saying, hey, Josh, buddy, I don't know. I don't trust your counterparty, Russia, to give you the wheat. So you're gonna have to put up a lot more collateral. I know we already agreed upon this, but times are tough. Okay, you're really gonna have to bump this up, and I'm already screwed. I'm waiting for this wheat so I can sell it, so I can therefore make a profit. But so I don't have anything, and
Yeah.
I could just go bust like that, and then it's not now that's on my counterparty too because they're
It just rolls up.
and that's where the contagion rolls in. It's just
Yeah.
how much perceived risk is in the system by other members of the system.
Yeah, and then the thing is that like if let's say if Comex were to go bust, so that's the central counterparty were to go bust, the Comex in this like in real life is a DFMU, designated financial market utility, fancy way of saying the Fed will step in and guarantee Comex, so they'll just print money, and like literally the Fed will print money. And just to be clear, the Fed will use COMEX, so the failing DFMU, to launder bank reserves into the real economy. That's as they as the failed central counterparty cash settles whatever obligations they need to cash settle. But because it makes the same argument with gold, makes the argument with silver or whatever, OCC with the GME or whatever, right? So there's that. So anyways, my take on this is that if a central counterparty were to fail and the Fed were to backstop, and I think the Fed were to backstop it because they're not going to walk away from a DFMU, that's going to be this huge implosion or potential huge implosion, depending on how spectacular the failure is, of real spendable units of currency in the real economy. This will actually leave the Fed's balance sheet and go into the commercial banking system by the time everything's said and done.
Commodities are collateral in these bushel of wheat examples that we're using. These things are what are being used as collateral. And for the most part, everything is fine. When times are good, you can use just about anything as collateral, and that's fine because we all trust each other because everything is great. But when times are getting tough, these Russian commodities, what Zoltan is saying is they could be seen as subprime collateral. And this is due to the sanctions and the perception that Russia has right now, the same perception that mortgage-backed securities had back in 2008. And that is all we were trying to hammer down is everything is about the perceived risk of everybody, the perceived risk of someone's balance sheet, the perceived risk of the counterparty that the person that you're doing the transaction with is using. Everything is just a mind game. And I think Zoltan hits the nail on the head here. If these Russian commodities do turn out to nobody wants to trade with people using Russian commodities due to whatever reason at all, we could have a lot of contagion and risk that we didn't even know was possibly in the system. These are these knockoff secondary effects that nobody thinks about when these politicians are putting on these sanctions. It is the butterfly effect.
Yeah. What I find the politicians are very good at, in a sense, is like they will get their immediate response, but then the question becomes at what cost? And when you have these second and third and knockoff effects, this becomes a problem. And Josh, just to reiterate something you said, it's not so much the fact that the commodity or the collateral that's commodities are impaired. It's like, listen, I'm concerned about Russian commodities coming out of Russia to wherever they need to go due to sanctions or whatever. That also means I'm concerned about anyone who's done business with anyone who's done business. You see, that's the this is the contagion that starts in the system and spreads. So I don't know where this ends, but I mean, just simply saying, like, this is like you said, I think it was a very, very interesting read, and I think that there's definitely something to that. And I will again say, again, not to turn it into a history lesson, that something very similar is what happened in it started in 97, ended up in Russia in 98 when Russia defaulted on their bonds. This divergence, with the commodities in this case, but in 98 it was bonds, spawn spreads that diverged.
Yes, we keep on banging on the collateral issue, and that is something that is collateral is the monetary system, and it is one of the most important things that you kind of have to bang down on. So we will continue to do so until it is no longer prevalent. So guys, without further ado, thank you very much, and we'll see you guys in the next.